Joining me now to break this all down is Rick Hasen. Rick is the Schwartz Endowed Chair in Law and a professor of political science at UCLA. He's also the editor of the election law blog and the author of the book, A Real Right to Vote: How a Constitutional Amendment Can Safeguard American Democracy. So, Rick, can I ask you first a question about the new conservative interest in voting? Because we've heard for years that conservatives do not like things like the Voting Rights Act, which allows the federal government some modest oversight of state election procedures. So why this new sweeping executive order that gives the president and the executive such control over voting?
Well, you're right, Melissa. I remember back when Biden was president not that long ago, and he issued an executive order that directed federal agencies to encourage voter registration, about the most anodyne, innocent thing you can imagine. And Republicans jumped all over and said, this is a federal power grab. These are issues that should be left to the states. So what's happening now is you've got a double problem coming from Donald Trump. Number one, substantively, what he's trying to do, the kinds of things like impose documentary proof of citizenship, a lot of these things are illegal or unconstitutional. But the other thing is the president himself has no authority over how federal elections are run. It's left to the states and it's left to Congress. So, and I think that was by design. And so what we have here is a kind of double bootstrapping in an effort to try to manipulate how the elections are going to be run, in an effort, I think, to try to help Trump and his party in future elections.
You just mentioned the new requirement that there should be proof of citizenship in order to vote. Let me play devil's advocate for a minute. What's the big deal? If we do have concern about voting fraud, and I know that voting fraud is glancingly rare in the United States, but if you are concerned, why not require people to show proof of citizenship? What's the big deal?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that federal law doesn't allow Trump to do it in the way that he's doing it. But even just on the general merits of it, when people sign up for their voter registration, they attest under penalty of perjury that they are citizens. And we have very low rates of non-citizen voting. When someone is a non-citizen and they sign one of those things, they're making themselves deportable. They're making themselves subject to criminal penalties. I actually, in the book you mentioned, A Real Right to Vote, I would support moving to something like the government registering all people and checking everyone's citizenship. There's nothing wrong with having that kind of requirement if it's done right. The problem with the kinds of laws that are being proposed now, the SAVE Act in Congress and what's in this EO, is that it puts the burden on voters to provide the kinds of documentations. You mentioned birth certificates. As I recall, the EO doesn't even allow a birth certificate as good enough proof. So we're really talking about not the concept of citizenship voting, but the details and how it's being done in a way that would disenfranchise millions of women, millions of people who've changed their names, people who are college students who don't have access to these documents, people who can't afford the almost $200 you need to get a passport. It's the details that really are disenfranchising, not the concept of requiring some attestation or some kind of proof of citizenship.
Right, and this isn't the only effort to disenfranchise voters. Let's pivot to North Carolina, and let me see if I can sum this up quickly. During the election in November 2024, North Carolinians voted for a state Supreme Court seat, and the Democratic incumbent, Allison Riggs, won by a very tight margin. And her Republican challenger immediately challenged tens of thousands of votes that had been cast. And now, two Republican judges on the Intermediate Appellate Court in North Carolina have sided with that Republican who lost the election and essentially has invalidated 60,000 votes unless those voters can cure their ballots and return them by the deadline. This all seems incredibly anti-democratic and an incredibly dangerous precedent to set. What's your thoughts on this?
Listen, I'm so worried about this. This is one of the biggest attacks on American democracy that we've seen in recent years. I'm putting it up there with what Trump tried to do after the 2020 election. I'm not aware of any election where people followed the rules that election officials put in place, and then they're being retroactively disenfranchised. It's a violation of due process. I hope that the federal courts get involved. There have been rare cases where state courts have so manipulated the rules to mess with the outcome outcome of an election. This happened back in Alabama in the 1990s. When something like this happens, it is true election subversion. We're not talking about voter suppression and things that make it harder to vote. We're talking about disenfranchising people who've actually voted, who are eligible to vote, and who followed the rules as they were set up. If this stands, it really is an affront to democracy in North Carolina and in this country. And I'm worried it's going to set a precedent for the future where you find technical violations of the law, people followed those rules, and rather than just fix the rules for the next time and tell election officials to do a better job, you change the results of the election by disenfranchising voters, by looking backwards. It's really, really frightening. And I'm worried about what's going to happen in North Carolina.
We are always grateful to you, Rick Hasen, for your expertise and that clarification. Thank you.